We're going to head to the Peterbrook Chocolatier studio line right now. Check in with Cecil Hurt of the Tuscaloosa News and Tidesports.com. Cecil, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Travis.
So we were talking about it in the opening segment, and I know you were as interested in seeing this special by HBO centering on the federal investigation into college basketball here in the last couple of years, with a particular focus on a former agent runner in Christian Dawkins and how far-reaching all of this was, going from the runner level up the ladder to the some of the more prominent head coaches in college basketball. Just some initial thoughts, some overall thoughts on how it was presented last night on HBO, Cecil, yeah. and did HBO, in your opinion, do a good job with that?
I thought it was good. I think it was probably a situation where if you didn't know or weren't aware of who some of the players were, not the basketball players, the people involved in the scheme were, if you hadn't been following it super closely for the last couple of years, you might wonder on some of those, well, who is this guy? Who is this guy? And they certainly presented it from Christian Dawkins' point of view, which is one point of view. But I think what was of interest here, and they HBO promoted it pretty strongly, as though you'll get to hear the tapes, and I think a lot of people were hoping that they would have new tapes, new recordings with coaches that hadn't been already revealed or discussed in transcript form. But, if you wanted to hear what the coaches sounded like, what they were saying, sort of get in your mind what was actually going on, I thought it was good. I thought it was revealing. Couldn't do it all. Couldn't nearly do, a 2-week trial and all the things leading up to it. Couldn't do it justice in 2 hours. But I thought some of it was fascinating.
To this point, anyway, Cecil, I sort of lean to the federal government being the biggest loser in all this. I mean, as we learned at the end of the documentary last night, Christian Dawkins has kind of moved on to bigger and better things in the world of entertainment. Yes, some coaches obviously lost their jobs, and that's tough.
Rick Pitino lost his job. And some assistant coaches, I guess, lost jobs. There really hadn't been a lot of repercussion otherwise. With some of the major name head coaches are still involved, or again, hadn't had any kind of case brought against them. The two that were prominent, obviously on the program and that have been discussed, were Will Wade at LSU and Sean Miller at Arizona. So right now they're both sitting there doing what they were doing at the time that they made the phone call. So, what the ultimate dispensation of that will be remains to be seen. But, as of right now, the only prominent head coach who's lost the job is Rick Pitino.
And he's got a new back job in the game.
Yeah. He's got a new job, and you have to assume that I own a college, which is his new gig there in New York, called the NCAA and said, "Hey, can we hire this guy?" You have to assume that they did. So, I guess it's complicated. It'll be, if it ever, if the NCAA ever actually makes a case out of this, which they don't seem to have any particular interest in doing. If they ever do, a lot of it's going to hinge on new rules that were written where head coaches are responsible for their assistant coaches and sort of should have known clauses in contracts and in compliance. So we'll just have to see how some of that plays out. I think if you just were a casual fan who was just kind of interested in what was going on, the tapes at least let you hear what was being discussed and make your own decisions. And the one thing I would say is we all watch Law and Order or these shows with lawyers in them, and the lawyer, he pulls this trick and Better Call Saul or whatever. If a case ever goes to the Committee on Infractions, that's not the level of proof required. It's not beyond a shadow of a doubt. It's likelier that it did happen than it didn't happen, which is an entirely different burden of proof. And it'll be interesting to see again if, at this point, I can't tell you, if they ever do anything. If they
20 years ago, though, Cecil, would what we know be enough for the NCAA to?
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
15, 20 years ago, right?
Yeah. Alabama was involved in a case 15, 20 years ago, and this would have been, easily enough. So, but again, they've always been. It's a delicate science to it, I suppose, and knowing what all the politics of every single case are. I don't pretend that I know all the politics of every single case, but sure, absolutely, it would have been. If they had wanted to hang somebody, they could have hung somebody. The big question that we don't have an answer to yet is, does the NCAA really want to hang people in major college basketball, where they make all their money? Where there's the Final Four, not this year. We're setting aside the unique circumstances of this year, but where they have their television contract and where they make their money.
By the way, in the last 10, 15 minutes, in a statement to Go 247, LSU Athletic Director Scott Woodward announced that there is no change to the employment status of Will Wade after last night's
LSU has decided whether they were talking about actual money or monopoly money. Yeah.
Of course OBJ walks around with monopoly money. Come on, Cecil.
Was tossing around. Which let me be clear, that didn't bother me, other than the technicality of the rule. That's if OBJ wanted to be, he might have been tossing those dollars somewhere else later on in the evening if he hadn't been tossing it there. So that's not a big issue. I'm not like, LSU should be stripped of their title because OBJ was over on the sideline. But don't tell me it was monopoly money. There's no way in the world. OBJ's walking around, Odell Beckham's walking around with a lot of street cred at stake that doesn't involve carrying a roll of monopoly money. And so don't try and tell me that. LSU, that was LSU, at least one LSU official's original statement. They revised that statement upon some video review.
Cecil, what about at the conference?
But they were aware. They were aware.
Exactly. They were aware. Yes, we are aware, and that'll be the extent of our commentary on the topic. What about at the conference level? I mean, if you're Greg Sankey right now, you're the SEC. Where do you kind of fall in on all this with LSU and Will Wade?
They don't have to necessarily make an infractions decision themselves. They can kick it back to the NCAA. My guess, I'm not going to sit and say, I know this for a fact, whether I do or don't, but I would think if I were a coach that wasn't involved in all this, I'd be a little frustrated with it. And you're the one that's got to go out there and play against these guys every day. So,
is it?
I think that would be very frustrating.
So, what are we to think about the SEC in that it apparently, in some instances, can interject itself, perhaps in hiring practices with some programs, some teams, athletic departments around the league, but in situations like this, I guess it counts more on the NCAA to sort of take up the charge.
I guess so. And, we're at the point now where it's going to be 2022 anyway. So, at that point, I don't know who's going to exactly care. Now, here's the one thing I'll say, Travis. Show me, let's just assume, and we're not the judge and jury here, but let's just assume, as many people will, based on that context, that LSU was buying players. Let's just make that assumption. I'm not saying they were. I'm not saying they weren't. But let's just say, clearly HBO wanted to indicate that. Christian Dawkins said that's what they were talking about. That's what they were talking about. What has occurred in the last 2 years that would be a disincentive for any of the other 13 coaches in the league to go out and do it?
Yeah.
What's occurred? Why would you not do it? What's happened?
There isn't much to discourage you from it, I'd say right now. And with that, you think it's still business as usual, Cecil?
Why wouldn't you say, well, I need guys like that?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to play against guys like that. Again, if you're making that assumption that LSU did that, and I'm not saying yes, no. You can listen to the tape. You can agree with Christian Dawkins. We'll call that's Christian Dawkins' interpretation of that tape. What disincentive is there? What deterrent is there? What would stop you from saying, I'm going to go do the same thing?
Yeah. Cecil, do you think it's, even with this, in the wake of this investigation, and really the federal government not delivering on what it initially told us it would in that first press conference, sort of revealing all this, do you think it's still largely business as usual in college basketball in terms of how it works with shoe companies and the grassroots and recruiting in general? Or do you think that's been at least tapped back some with all this?
I'm not involved in recruiting or out there and around. So strictly from the outside, not positioning myself as an expert, do you see any difference? Do you see any different names involved with these top recruits?
No.
I don't see any difference. I don't see that it's stopped anybody. Maybe it has, but I certainly don't see it.
Cecil, on the sports front in general, and certainly we have a tendency to look ahead.
One thing I do want to say, Travis, since we're both Scorsese fans, and there's a connection there.
Oh,
but, in the basketball world, Christian Dawkins gets to be the guy who wouldn't flip, wouldn't testify against these other people, went to trial, took his sentence, did the right thing. In that other world, there would have been a meeting at the front end where some guys sat around and said, well, what do you think he's going to do? And then you'd gotten to the end of the meeting, and Remo would have said, well, why take a chance? So from that standpoint, Christian Dawkins probably a little better off than he might have been.
Yeah.
He might have been if it had been Jimmy Conway or Remo making those decisions.
Yeah.
I'll take a chance.
There are certainly parallels that can be drawn in
those, absolutely. The
scenarios.
Parallel is the way the FBI tried to build the case, which lots of cases have been built that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
now, as we try to look ahead to the fall, with as much of a strong look to us as we possibly can, we learned today that another major sporting event has been canceled. This time it's Wimbledon that goes by the boards. Wimbledon's set to take place June 29th through July 12th. Cecil, does that does that add to the concern where the fall is where we're looking ahead to, or are we still trying to maintain that look of poise and calm even here on April 1st?
Well, I mean, I think people are starting to accept. I think even if you saw the president's press conference yesterday, I think that people are starting to accept more that there are consequences out there, and that the best thing we can do is social distancing, wash our hands, follow the rules. And so I don't think anybody wants to be the first to the first big event to put themselves out there and say, well, we're going ahead. We're not going to do all that stuff. There's probably not for Wimbledon, not for the Masters now, but there may be time to change some things later on down the road. But I think Wimbledon, like a lot of those events, that's a major planning logistic situation for those players. And how long are you going to, if you take it into May, the decision makes itself. People can't commit to do it. So I think it's smart. The one that's going to be fascinating, I talked to J.C. Wells yesterday, is going to be whether the Masters, which clearly is not going to be played in a couple of weeks, we know that, whether they try to have any sort of 2020 event, or whether they simply say, you know what, we're not going to change who we are and what the iconic image of the Masters is. You could play on that course, and that course would be immaculate, and you could play on it in October. There's no question about that. And the weather in Augusta is going to be bitter in October, but it wouldn't look the same. You can't make the course look the same. It's not the same weekend, just like the Derby is not the same without everything that goes on around it. Mm-hmm. And so it'll be an interesting decision when Augusta National makes it as to whether they, there's television money involved. Now, given the membership, Augusta National will survive without the television money. That's not making or breaking Augusta National. The guys who are members, they can float a year. They'll do okay. So it's an interesting concept. Do they want to play? The players want to play. I would say 99% of them. Green jacket's a green jacket, whether you want it in October or want it in April. But as fiercely protective as Augusta National is of that brand, it doesn't matter. And I'm not. All the tournaments are great. I'm not making fun of any tournament, but the Quad Cities Classic, you can kind of play that one in June, or you can play it in September. Not going to affect anything. But everything about the Masters is wrapped up in that date, that spring, the way the course looks, the week surrounding it. And I wonder if they aren't going to just say, you know what, we'll play it in 2021. Doesn't mean, there can still be a U.S. Open. There can still be a PGA Championship. Mm-hmm. But we're going to play in 2021 when we usually, in April of 2021.
The Masters and Augusta National, they don't have to overextend themselves. I mean, they don't have to act in any type of manner in which it might even exude a little bit of desperation, right?
Right, right. And again, it's significant television money, don't get me wrong. But they don't live and die on television.
Right.
If the dues go up, for 1 year, the dues go up. Those guys they'll find it in their budget for 1 year's increase of dues. Bill Gates will figure that out.
Yeah, they'll be all right. I
They'll
think
make that work.
Condoleezza can write that check, right? If she needs to.
Yeah, I think they all. as a collective membership, I think they can work that out.
What about college athletics, though, Cecil, in terms of needing a college football season of some kind to come off here?
Right.
Where are we at with that, especially on the heels of no NCAA men's basketball tournament?
Well, again, that's one question over at the Malmore complex where your budget's $175 million. It's a different question at the University of Hawaii, and it's a much different question at St. Joseph's in Philadelphia, where basketball is your revenue sport. Now, everybody, and you have no football. Everybody it's not just that revenue. There's a value to having a football team. There's brand identification. There's booster opportunities that are connected with football. The SEC teams are going to be fine. They're going to be, even if the absolute worst case scenario of not having a season comes around. Now that'll hurt. It'll stick them in the pocketbook, but they could weather it for a year. But there's a lot of programs that couldn't and wouldn't be able to. So I think right now you're just going to see decisions made at incremental dates. We'll know more April the 15th than we know today. We'll know more on May 1st than we know April the 15th. And we just won't have gotten to that date, at least I would think at least for another month, where you start canceling events in September. Yes, a lot goes into it. Yes, there's got to be preparation. Yes, very possible. I wrote a couple of weeks ago about pushing the season back, and people were like, "Oh, that won't happen." That's not because for one thing, there was a lot of talk at that time that everything would be over by Easter. Everything would be over by the end of the month. And now, people are looking a little bit more long range, and people are considering possibilities like that. If I had to guess, there will be some sort of season. But I think right now, what athletic departments, coaches want is just not to make a firm decision about events in September, not to make them on April the 1st, or April the 15th for that matter, until there's a little more data, a little more understanding of where the curve on this virus is, on what you can do with large gatherings, how that could affect things, on what the television contract. You can't just say we're going to play 10 games instead of 12, and the rights holders not say, well, then we're only going to pay you for 10 games instead. That's all got to be
proration. Yeah,
to have it. So might be some give and take there. Again, as I said 2 weeks ago, what you might do is say, but what we will have for you rights holders is we negotiate this, we're going to have another round of playoffs. There's going to be 4 big money playoff games. So all that factors in, and those discussions are ongoing. And but I think right now the watchword would probably be deliberation and continue to be information gathering at this point.
There you go. Cecil Hurt, always great stuff with us here on Southern Fried Sports. And as you know, obviously, always great stuff there at Tuscaloosa News and Tidesports.com. Cecil, we always appreciate you taking the time. Stay safe, my friend.
Sure. Glad to do it. Thanks.